Hello and welcome back to These Blind Eyes 6580. Today, hopefully you joined me for the video I put out for refried beans. I talked about doing this video and that one. And hopefully they turned out great, and if not, hopefully they were close enough to what you prefer for taste. You can make your adjustments accordingly. Now this is browning the ground beef to make my tacos. I have not turned it on yet. First thing I do is put the meat into my skillet. I'm using a non-stick for it because I don't like to dirty more than one thing. And what's the point in browning the meat in a cast iron if I'm going to do the seasoning in the non-stick? And I do the seasoning in the non-stick because it's a lot easier to clean. So first you put your ground beef, into the pan and then break it up with your hands, your fingers. Then obviously you're going to need to wash your hands after that. Another thing that you will need, and especially if you're blind like me, I'd suggest using what I use. You're going to have to drain the meat, because the purpose of browning the meat is to get most of the fat and grease off of it before you start adding seasoning and stuff like that to it. And I'm not doing the tacos in this same video. You'll have to check out the taco video. But for one, if you need to brown meat, learn how to brown meat regardless of what you're going to make, you don't need to see me making tacos. Two, if you're wanting to learn how to make the tacos the way I do and learn how I use my seasoning, make my seasonings and stuff for it, you don't need to see me brown the meat. But you're going to have to drain the meat. Now, since I can't see, plus I use a lot of meat. I'm using between 2 and 2.5 pounds of ground beef. Now, just don't get excited. I will tell you the measurements I use if I'm using half that amount, which most people typically use around 1.25 pounds. Either way, I still use the same thing to drain it, and that's a cookie sheet. I don't use half sheets of paper towels. I fold them to where it's the size of a full paper towel. And I put them 3 or 4 paper towels thick, and there's 2 stacks of them on the cookie sheet. I use a cookie sheet because I am blind, and it makes for a much bigger target. So, just so you're aware. All right, I'm going to turn this on. Just so you know, my lowest temperature is at 3 o'clock on a clock face. Highest is 9 o'clock. I have this past 6 o'clock, somewhere near the 7 o'clock range. Now you're going to know what raw hamburger feels like. The ground beef, you're going to know what it feels like if you don't already. You already know what cooked hamburger tastes feels like. So you're going to want to cook it to where it is just starting to get the texture of being cooked. Now, if you've watched my taco seasoning video for chicken tacos, it's almost the same, but it's a little bit different. Reason being, I use a lot less garlic. Well, I'll get into that on the taco video. That ain't really necessary for browning meat. But I essentially go by sound. I kind of have to. Sound and a little bit of smell. Because you're going to start smelling it once it starts getting cooked. Now I'm using a non-stick skillet. And I have a plastic or rubberized or whatever spatula that I am using. When I go to flip the meat, I don't pick it up and just slam it over. I do more of a rolling motion to try to keep from throwing the stuff out of the pan. Especially since I can't see what I'm doing. But I'm sure you can hear the meat cooking now. But you can only break this, it's ground beef, but you can only break it up so much. Because of the fat and everything else and just the texture of it, it clumps together when it's raw. So I use the spatula after I start to flip it, and get it all flipped the first time, then I start using the spatula to chop it up even more, because it'll break up more and stay broke up the more it gets cooked. Yeah, so you can hear that. You got to be able to hear that on video. And I don't know. It's probably, been around 30 seconds it's been cooking like this. I go between 30 and 60 seconds each time before I flip it, because I just don't want to over brown it. The goal here is to brown it, not cook it. So now I'm making that rolling motion with the spatula. I'm getting under it with the spatula from the edge. Like that time, I was going crossbody, so I pulled it across. Now I'm sitting here chopping. Just all over the pan, chopping it with the spatula. Meanwhile, it's still cooking. Now, just to give you a heads up, you're going to have to scoop a little bit out of the pan and use your hand. I mean, if you can see, you don't even need to watch a video on how to brown meat. I mean, crap, ask somebody and you can see it browning. But if you can't see, you're going to have to feel the texture of it. And you can't chop it too much. You don't want big clumps, so that's the whole point in chopping it all. And like I said, I got it between 6, so it's a little bit past what I'd call medium as far as the heat's concerned. And for me, it's a perfect temperature. Like my mom, who can see, she cooks it much harder, much faster than what I do, because she can see what she's doing. Cooking it a little slower and now I'm getting ready to flip it again. Cooking it a little slower gives you more room for error. But you would be surprised, if you've never browned meat before, ground beef, you would be surprised at how much fat and liquid comes out of this meat. So a cookie sheet is not overdoing it, especially for, like I said, I got about 2.5 pounds of beef here, I'd say. Now, I typically, if I'm going to cook something like this, I make a lot, because taco meat is something you can freeze. I don't know why I keep talking about tacos since I'm just browning the meat, but the taco video's coming and it's on my mind, so I want to mention it. I'm still chopping it. I got it flipped for the second time, and I'm still going around the pan, and I'm chopping. If you leave it in big clumps, the center of the big clumps is still going to be raw instead of browned. Now I'm going to flip it again. I'm saying flipping it, but the more you chop it up and the more it gets brown, it's almost, there's parts of it where it's more like stirring it than anything. But now I know it's starting to get close, because that time when I flipped it, you could hear the sizzling slow down just a little bit. So I know it's getting closer to being done for what I want. Now I'm still chopping. I don't know if you can hear it or not. but I haven't stopped chopping on this meat since I started flipping it. Oh crap, this is already almost brown. Yeah, I think next time I go to flip it, it's going to be done. Oh, Lord. Then well, I'll get to that once I turn it over onto the cookie sheet. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn the heat off because I know it's almost done browning. The pan's still hot even though you're not hearing it sizzle. Alright. Now I am going to grab my cookie sheet with the paper towels already placed on it. Like I said, it's just a much nicer, bigger target to hit when you can't see shit. I was a poet and didn't know it. And I'm using the spatula to make sure I got it all out of the pan. Now you want to spread it out as much as possible. Now when you go to put it back in the pan, you're going to be picking it up off the paper towel to do so. Just as a heads up for that. You aren't going to want to try to tip the cookie sheet in order to put it back into the pan. Pick it up with your fingers. Now this is going to be cooled down more than enough for me to do so by the time it's time for me to put it back in the pan. Because if you try to do it the tipping way, you're going to end up with some of that grease draining back into the thing. So if you haven't checked out the refried beans, check it out. They taste amazing. I got them staying warm on the stove while I'm making my tacos and Spanish rice and whatnot. Join me for the next video after this where I will be telling you how I make my taco seasoning and how to finish making tacos if that's what your desire is. If you have any questions or comments, anything like that, hit me up at littlemb6580 at gmail.com. Until next time, y'all take care.